Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're setting the stage for a truly compelling chronological journey through 19th century India. It's an era defined by a pretty intense paradox. On one hand, you have external conquest by a foreign power, but on the other, there's this profound internal intellectual awakening. So let's just dive right into this and explore how these two massive forces collided and ultimately reshaped the destiny of millions.
I mean, it's the ultimate historical puzzle, right? How exactly did a trading company, a corporate entity essentially obsessed with quarterly profit margins and shipping routes, manage to swallow an entire vast subcontinent, a place filled with powerful empires and millions of people? We're talking about a monumental historical shift here. It was a race for riches that literally escalated into the total domination of one of the wealthiest regions on Earth. Let's look at how this unprecedented takeover actually went down. So here's a quick roadmap. The journey begins in the 1600s, with the British East India Company arriving purely as merchants setting up coastal trade posts. But by 1757, things take a dramatic military turn at the Battle of Plassey. Fast forward exactly a century to 1857, and the subcontinent explodes into the Sepoy Rebellion. Finally, in 1858, the era of the company ends, and the direct rule of the British Raj begins.
Section 1. The Rise of the Company. It was a creeping, almost accidental takeover. Back in the 1600s, the British arrived solely for lucrative trade. They set up these quiet coastal outposts, Madras in 1639, Bombay in 1661, and Kolkata in 1690. At first, they were relatively small players, focused mostly on fending off rival European merchants. But as powerful local Indian empires like the Mughals and the Marathas began to decline and fragment, this corporation just stepped right into the power vacuum. What started as trade transformed into an aggressive race to exploit India's incredible wealth, using alliances and their own private armies to secure absolute dominance.
Section 2. The Battle of Plassey. This right here was the inciting incident. The year is 1757. The location is Bengal, an incredibly wealthy region. The furious local ruler, Nawab Siraj-ud-Dawla, had just finally had enough of the British company's overreach and unchecked expansions. He marched his immense forces to meet the East India Company's private army on the battlefield at Plassey. The tension was just absolute.
The sheer scale of the confrontation was pretty staggering. You had a British army of about 3,000 men staring down the Nawab's overwhelming force of 50,000 soldiers. On paper, it was no contest. The British should have been completely wiped off the map. But history is rarely that straightforward. The crucial point is that the British didn't win through pure military might or some tactical battlefield genius. No, they won through espionage and backroom dealings. Unbeknownst to the Nawab, the British had cut a secret deal with his own general, Mir Jafar. At a critical moment during the battle, Mir Jafar quietly withdrew his troops. This catastrophic betrayal just decimated the Bengali forces, resulting in an unbelievable victory for that tiny British army. The aftermath of Plassey basically changed the world forever. The British installed the traitor Mir Jafar as their puppet Nawab, but they didn't stop there. By 1764, they won another decisive victory at the Battle of Buxar against combined Indian forces. Following this, the Mughal emperor was forced to grant the East India Company the Diwani, which is the absolute right to collect all taxes and revenues from Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. Overnight, this corporate entity became the supreme military and economic power in the region, literally bankrolling their future conquests with Indian tax money.
Section 3. The 1857 Rebellion.
A century of company rule had stretched Indian society to its absolute breaking point. Grievances had been mounting for decades. The British were aggressively expanding their territory through policies like the Doctrine of Lapse. This basically allowed them to just annex any Indian state whose ruler died without a male heir. Add to that ruinous taxation, the destruction of local economies, and a deep, arrogant disregard for Indian culture and traditions. The absolutely crucial factor here is that to enforce all of this, the company employed around 300,000 Indian soldiers known as sepoys. The company had literally handed weapons to the very people they were oppressing. All it took was a spark, and that spark came in the form of new standard-issue rifle cartridges. Rumors spread like wildfire among the sepoys that these cartridges, which, by the way, soldiers had to physically bite to open, were greased with tallow from cows and pigs. This was profoundly offensive to the strict religious beliefs of both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. Believing the British were intentionally trying to defile them, the sepoys reached their limit. On May 10, 1857, in Meerut, a massive armed uprising began. The conflict that followed was just utterly horrific. An estimated 800,000 Indians and British died from the rebellion. Brutal combat, horrific massacres, and the resulting disease and famine. It was a devastating, bloody struggle that fundamentally shocked the British establishment to its absolute core. Section 4. Dawn of the British Raj. Now, the rebellion had failed to kick the British out, but the political fallout was absolute. It made one thing undeniably clear to the authorities in London. A private corporation was entirely unfit to govern a subcontinent of hundreds of millions of people. So, in 1858, the British government officially dissolved the East India Company. The British Crown took direct control, marking the official beginning of the British Raj. Queen Victoria's government was now formally in charge, though for the average Indian citizen, the oppressive reality of colonial rule pretty much remained unchanged.
Section 5. The Indian Renaissance.
While armed rebellion was crushed in 1857, a powerful intellectual revolution was already well underway. Colonial domination forced India to take a long, hard look in the mirror. Enlightened Indian thinkers realized that the society of the early 19th century had become rigid, decadent, and painfully caste-ridden. The introduction of the English language and modern Western ideas, things like liberty, democracy, and equality, exposed serious, deeply ingrained weaknesses within Indian society itself. To face the challenges of Western colonialism, they knew they first had to reform, restructure, and revitalize their own culture from the inside out. This was the Indian Renaissance. To combat these societal evils, enlightened thinkers took two primary paths. On one side, you had reformist movements. These leaders responded by embracing the modern, scientific temper of the era, pushing for progressive, forward-looking social changes. On the other side were the revivalist movements. They believed the answer wasn't Westernization, but rather reviving the purity of ancient Indian traditions and Vedic thought, feeling that foreign influence had really corrupted their true cultural ethos. Both paths, however, had the exact same goal: combating societal evils. Section 6. Key social reform movements. These leaders systematically targeted specific social plagues. The Brahmo Samaj took aim at terrible practices like sati and the subjugation of women. The Arya Samaj fought against idolatry and untouchability, and the Satyashodhak Samaj boldly targeted the oppressive priesthood and the rigid caste system. Let's look a little closer at the brilliant minds behind these movements. This incredible title, the father of modern India, belongs to Raja Ram Mohan Roy. In 1828, he founded the Brahmo Samaj in Calcutta. He was a pioneer, an enlightened intellectual who fiercely attacked idol worship, caste oppression, and terrible practices like sati, which was the burning of widows, and child marriage. He advocated passionately for modern education and widow remarriage. His epoch-making work literally laid the foundation for modern Indian social thought. Decades later, in 1873 in Maharashtra, Jyotirao Phule founded the Satyashodhak Samaj. Phule's work was incredibly radical and deeply compassionate. He advocated for rational thinking and outright rejected the traditional priesthood. Most importantly, he actively campaigned for the education and social rights of deprived groups, famously using the powerful term Dalit to unify and advocate for the oppressed castes. Just 2 years later, in 1875, Swami Dayanand Saraswati founded the Arya Samaj. This is a prime example of a revivalist movement, operating under the beautiful motto, "Make this world noble." His goal was to reform society by reconnecting people with ancient Vedic knowledge. But make no mistake, while looking to the past, the Arya Samaj was fiercely fighting for the future. They advocated for social equality, fought to abolish untouchability and child marriage, and worked tirelessly to improve the condition of women. We've covered incredible ground today. We've seen how a trading company ruthlessly conquered a subcontinent, sparking a bloody rebellion. But we've also seen how that dark period forced a massive internal societal awakening, an Indian Renaissance that challenged deeply rooted inequalities. So I leave you with this final provocative thought. How did this intense 19th century crucible, caught between the crushing weight of colonial oppression and the enlightened fire of internal social reform, build the modern Indian identity? How did it lay the inevitable groundwork for the great independence movements of the 20th century? Think about that for a while. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning history.